Marketing Candidates Forum here at the Numerica Performing Arts Center. And now the 12th District State Representative race featuring Dan Maher and Carrie Condotta. And Dave Bernstein, you have the first question for Dan Maher.
Good evening, gentlemen. Dan, you and your opponent, I think, have expressed very different views on Initiative 1433, the minimum wage and paid sick leave initiative. Again, what is your opinion on the impacts, whether it's good or bad, to the 12th District's economy?
Well, generally, I would prefer not to have initiated measures to begin with. I would like to see the state legislature deal with these issues. Now, on minimum wage, we do have a minimum wage, and there's a reason for minimum wage, and that needs to be talked about. There's a lot of the issues around the scare tactics sometimes about what could happen to small business and those kind of things. But, you know, CTAC passed a $15 an hour deal, and it would have been great if they would have been able to hold that up to the airport employees if they would have paid that amount. They sued and said the city didn't have the right to force that onto them. And I think that would have been a great experiment to see when we had outside money actually coming in and at $15 an hour, and we would have seen a huge increase in the economy in CTAC. In state initiative measures like this, we'll see an overall part of that. And I talked in the past about, you know, we can talk about small restaurants and those kind of things, is that if I had a small business, I would like to have an environment where I can pay my employees a livable wage and still compete. I can't do that when I have outside interests that are paying much less, and it forces me to basically not want to be in business, because I would not want to have to run a business that way. I would prefer that I have the ability to make sure that my employees are taken care of. This is one vehicle to try to make that environment happen that way. So I am for it. I think it's a step in the right direction. There might be some issues that we have to deal with in the legislature, but let's take the steps in the right directions. And when you put new the economy, it'll help.
All right, Dave, your question for Carrie Condotta.
And again, Carrie, again, I think it's clear your views on the initiative. Again, what is your opinion going to be on the impacts in our 12th District economy?
Thank you, Dave. I'm very concerned. The cost of doing business in Washington is extremely high. We have some of the highest payroll taxes in the nation. We have a B&O tax as one of the highest business taxes in the nation. You add that to a large minimum wage and you get a very, very, very high cost of doing business, particularly in labor. And when you raise the cost of something dramatically, in this case 30 or 40%, generally you're going to have less of it. You're going to see less entry-level jobs. You're going to see a slowdown because you can't do basic economics. We have an alternative. I saw this initiative come to that alternative. We drafted it, but we couldn't get it through the process. Oregon has looked at it, and there's rural areas, and they're all different. One size does not fit all. I agree. So we drafted a bill that would allow Seattle to do pretty much whatever they want to do. If they want to do $15, that's fine. That bill also has a suburban area around Seattle that includes Pierce, Snohomish, and most of King County. That would be a mid-range, about a $12 position, and it would allow the rural areas outside to be close to what we are right now, about $10 an hour. So one size doesn't fit all, but this was done in Oregon. I think it was a good approach, and we will offer it as an alternative should this pass, because the other choice is a $13.50 minimum wage plus all the costs I talked about. I think it'll be really hard on small business. And last but not least, I've heard me say this before, very people that promote this say they do not like big corporations, and the so-called 1% plays directly into that. Olive Garden and all these corporations can spread those costs. Home Depot, Costco, they can spread those costs all over. The little guys can't. They have to absorb it all. They have to pay it all. And to me, it's going to really, really make small business difficult and play right into the hands of the larger corporations. Thank you.
Steve Hare, you are next. Your first question for Carrie Condotta.
Carrie, should Washington be a right-to-work state?
Well, there's times that I've felt that way because unions here have had a significant presence in the political spectrum. Right now, when we look at the elections across the state going into different coffers, it's almost a 2.5 or 3-to-1 margin on the Democrat side, mostly powered by unions. And so there's a huge influence politically Now, functionally, I think unions have a place, and some of them actually are doing a very good job. I think one union I'm very impressed with is the IBEW, the electrical workers. They have found that it's more important to work with the company than stay on the old ground of we're not going to take any cuts, we're not going to make any adjustments, we just want more and more and more. We've watched them work with us on the Republican side with actually putting tax policy together for the server farms. And we've worked together with those companies. And what we found is that it works out pretty well. And so I think what we need more than anything is probably the unions to get a more modern approach like they do in Europe. There's places in Germany, for instance. I know when the economy slowed down, Porsche sat down with their unions and said, look, we got a problem. Car sales are going to drop like a stone. We've got a major recession. They worked out a deal. They kept everybody working, they took a pay cut, they cut back on some benefits, and when it was all said and done, they all survived and they came back. If we could get that atmosphere between our unions and our business, we may not need a right to work state. But the old days of just more and more and more and more benefits, and we're not going to take a cut no matter what, that isn't working.
All right, Steve, your question for Dan Maher.
Same question, Dan.
Thank you for the same question. There's a difference in political contributions that come from a union compared to like Freedom Works. A union represents people. I'm all for representation of people. I don't know what else to say about that. There is a difference. When we have organizations that are working for rights, safety, to have a safe place to work, to have a livable wage again, those are things that need to be protected, not taken away. If you're not sure what a right to work state is, there's a lot of them. You have no ability to stand up for any group, can't strike, they can't perform possibly the things they need to do to hold up to their rights as workers. If you look at these states, and I think the comparison should be to go to look at what's going on in right to work states and see how the employees are doing. You know, when we talk about public service, it was a public service employees that stepped back and said, you know, we're not going to take our COLA when we had a crisis in the state. People that are in service and understand that, those are people that will step up when they feel that they're being treated fairly. You know, Kerry brought up our taxes and all those kinds of things that are going on in this state. We have a very regressive tax plan, which then puts the biggest burden on the people that can afford it the least. That does put pressure on whether you need more pay to make sure that you can support your family. We don't need to get rid of these vehicles for people to protect themselves from profit. We have a large business environment that treats employees as a commodity. There's something that we need to keep pushing down to make it cheaper so we can provide some kind of competition.
Thank you, Dan. Your 2 minutes is up. Cal Fitzsimmons, your question for Dan Maher, please.
Okay, Dan. Do you believe that climate change is a serious threat to the Earth? And if so, is Washington State doing enough to address it?
Yes, I do believe in the science. And that it's affected by man. I remember when Earth Day started when I was in middle school. And one of the most frustrating things about watching what happened in our country was that they were starting to figure some of these things out, that there were some issues with pollution on our Earth, and that we have to protect this total Earth environment or we're going to be in big trouble. And we're starting to see some of the results of that. If I was talking to the president of the IBEW, and I'm endorsed by them, and then I started arguing with him, which I thought maybe you might hold your endorsement after this. Our job's more important than the environment, is what I was talking about. Are we supposed to be pushing for coal-fired plants in our state to make sure that we have jobs? That short-term thinking has a lot of problems. You know, as a labor union, I can see that they want to do that, but I think it would do them well and a lot of other organizations to say, let's stand up for what's really right. What's the best thing for our kids and our grandchildren? and make decisions based on that. And I think that's one of the roles of government, not to make sure that we're greasing the wheels so the next company can come in and get tax breaks to make sure we have some jobs and maybe we'll get our tax income up to the point where we can maybe provide some more services. It's short-sighted if we're only looking 5 years down the road. We need to look longer term. Our government needs to look longer term than that. And we can pave the direction to make sure that we are putting less carbon in our environment.
Carrie Condotta, your question from Cal Fitzsimmons.
Well, Kerry, I was going to ask you the same question, but I wanted to return to that minimum wage question. You mentioned that when you get to the legislature, if it passes, you will start working on an alternative measure. I'm curious as to if that makes you uncomfortable at all to already, before it's even been voted on, be talking about overriding the will of the people.
No, because I think it's just a different approach. I don't think it's really overriding the will of the people. But the fact is we'd have to have a 2/3 vote in both chambers, and that's very difficult to do. What I always want to offer is solutions to problems. I wish we could have pushed this bill through this session and had the alternative so people could choose, because then we could say which is the will of the people. And I would bet that the process or the approach that I have would actually be more popular. But this is what we're up against. The fact is initiatives are becoming more difficult to deal with because they are larger in scope and larger in cost. The classroom size initiative is a perfect example. People thought, yeah, that's great. Smaller classrooms, it's good for everybody, but they didn't see the $4 or $5 billion bill that was attached to it. And guess who gets to deal with that? The legislature gets to deal with that. And we've had to thwart the will of the people because we couldn't afford to pay for it. And so we've had to put that initiative aside. So initiatives are very challenging, and there's more coming at us all the time. It seems like they're getting bigger and more costly. Dan said I agree with him on this one point, is I think that I'd rather see things go through the legislature. Most of the initiatives that are on the ballot this year have all been before the legislature, including the carbon tax, and they did not pass. In a legislature that is very balanced, that these things should have had an opportunity to either pass or be modified and pass, none of them made it out. So instead, outside money steps in, puts it on the ballot, and promotes it that way. You're bypassing the legislature. Now, initiatives in the past have done other things the other way too. But actually, Cal, I think we should look at all the possibilities. I am very concerned about this passing and what it's going to do to Eastern Washington, and I think we better have some alternatives ready.
Okay, your closing statements. We'll start with 1 minute for Dan Maher.
This is the longest job interview I've ever been in my life. And in that vein, I'd like to talk about a little bit more about me. I live a very conservative personal life. I've been married 27 years. I have 5 children. It takes commitment to do that. And I also have a commitment to rural areas. I grew up in a very rural area. There were 5,000 people in a 3-county area in North Dakota. I understand the rural issues and how you have to do things to get it to work here. It's not a divide on party lines. To say that we have to be in the Republican side because you're in a rural area is not serving us well. It's a rural versus urban issues. And some of those cross over, especially when it comes to transportation of our products to market. They have a stake in it too.
Thank you, Dan. Carrie Condotta, your closing minute.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, everybody, for doing this. This is quite a board of distinguished gentlemen up here. I've been around you guys a long time. Folks, every one of these candidates you're going to see tonight have worked hard. I've been out with them on the trail. We've been all over the district. We've been all over the counties, and I can tell you every one of them has worked really hard to earn your vote. Now it's your turn. It's the end of this long election cycle that we're all very, very tired of, but they've really put in the time. I hope you'll put in the time to mark those ballots, regardless of who you choose. Please fill out those ballots and make those votes. That's what's really important in America, and it looks like right now the turnout's going to be really good. When we have a primary with a turnout of 33%, folks, that's disheartening to all of us. Let's have a big turnout. Let's vote. Let's do what America does best. In regards to the outcome, we're all going to go on the next day. But I thank you all for your continued support, and it's been a wonderful ride, and maybe this year, for the first time in many years, I'll get to be a chairman because we're 2 seats out of the majority, and right now, according to the polling, we just might make that. So I'm looking forward to hopefully coming back as a chairman. But thank you again for your support.
That is our first 12th District State Representative race. Dan Maher and Carrie Condotta. Up next, Douglas County Commission race featuring